We're moving now to the U.S., where the stock index futures are pointing to a slightly higher open today as investors gear up for the latest in economic data as the year draws to a close. This week, markets opened back up following the festive holiday break. U.S. stocks finished Tuesday lower as shares of tech giant Apple tumbled. Investors stateside will be turning their attention to the data space at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. The routine mortgage applications are due out, followed by consumer confidence and pending home sales, both of which are set to be released at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Meantime, at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, the Dallas Fed's Texas Service Sector Outlook survey is expected to be released. In politics, investors are likely to still be mulling over the latest concerning tax reform, which has boosted market sentiment in recent weeks. On Friday, President Donald Trump signed a $1.5 trillion tax bill in law, capping off a year-long effort to cut tax rates for both individuals and companies. Well, no earnings are expected to be published today. In Asia, markets closed mixed as Australian and Japanese energy names rose after oil touched a more than two-year high overnight. Meanwhile, South Korea's Kospi index reversed early losses as blue-chip tech names rebounded. Japan's benchmark Nikkei 225 hovered around break-even for most of the session after coming under slight pressure in the previous session. The index nudged higher by 0.08% as trading houses saw gains, while major exporters traded mixed, with Toyota closing 0.29% higher. Across the Korean Strait, the Kospi raised losses seen earlier in the session to finish higher by 0.38%. In Australia, the ASX 200 closed flat as gains by gold producers were offset by moderate losses in most other sectors. Our Greater China markets were in negative territory, with the Hang Seng index off by 0.12%. Losses in mainland markets tipped in afternoon trade. The Shanghai Composite lost 0.93% to end at 3,275 points. The Shenzhen Composite shed 0.7% to close at 1,878 points. Well, as 2017 gradually comes to an end, the International Monetary Fund sees some harmony in the global economy, but insists proper actions must be taken for a stronger growth in 2018. This is part of the recommendations of the fund at the last annual meeting of the IMF World Bank in Washington. According to the managing director of the fund, Christine Lagarde, this is not the time to be complacent, but a time for countries to take the right policy decisions.
There is a certain degree of harmony in global economic growth, and I'll come to that in a second, about the things which have changed and the things that have not changed. But certainly our goal is to turn that harmony that we see into a season of action. So that's my reference to fixing the roof while the sun is shining. So let me give you a little bit of the current picture. What we are seeing is a recovery that is stronger, that is much more broadly based than in recent years. And we expect higher global growth this year and next. 3.6% this year, 3.7% next year. So in both cases, 0.1 percentage points higher than our July projection, and certainly much higher than the 3.2 growth that we had in 2016. Now, measured by GDP, nearly 75% of the world is experiencing an upswing. And we are seeing it's the broadest based recovery in the last 10 years. Added to that, it is actually driven by investment, by consumption, and by trade. And it is shared between the emerging market economies, which, as you remember, were providing about 80% of growth in the last few years. It is shared between the emerging market economies, still active, but also with other countries like Europe, like Japan, and the US. So that's a change. What has not changed, though, is that the recovery is not complete. Last year, 47 countries experienced negative growth on a per capita basis, including many small and fragile economies. Far too many people across all types of economies are seeing their aspirations limited by the impact of technologies and the repercussions of excessive income inequality. The result is growing political tensions in many places and increased skepticism about the benefits of globalization. So, our suggestion is that it is not time to be complacent, it's time to take those policy decisions that will actually enable more people and more countries to benefit from that recovery that should be made sustainable. And that's the question that we will put to the policymakers, to the finance ministers and to the governors of central bank who will be attending the meetings as of today. So what can be this season of action? My global policy agenda, which you have received copy of, is where we outline the steps that we recommend. Policymakers can use this moment to provide more certainty and provide for the future risks. The first priority, as we see it, is to actually secure that recovery. And that includes monetary policy that continues to support the recovery while also recognizing risks created by easy financial conditions. And that's a subtle balancing act which will be determined by the situation of the country based on the independence of the banks and their mandate. On the fiscal front, countries with healthier finances should invest more in their own economies through infrastructure spending, strengthening safety nets, investing in education, and allowing women to access the labour market. Other countries should use this moment of better and stronger recovery to reduce public debt relative to GDP. Now, this is not it. You remember the three-pronged approach that we recommended? We are still using this reference to the three-pronged approach: monetary, fiscal, structural reforms. And many of those structural reforms will actually come easier and more efficient because there is recovery underway. Our research has demonstrated that. Now, structural reforms will vary depending on what country we are talking about. And they will include reform of the labour market, reform of access to the service market, removing the rents that sometimes cripple those markets, removing barriers.
Christine Lagarde, the Managing Director of the IMF. We'll take a quick break, and when we return, Sudan to devalue its currency, and we will also be looking at how entrepreneurs helped drive business in 2017 in Africa. Just stay with us.